Okay, so in this video, we're going to be doing a full overview of what a headhunting agency actually is, and we're going to be covering all the things that you can now see on the screen. So let's go right into it. So we're going to be looking at who am I, what actually is a headhunting agency, and is it the same as recruitment, why it works so well in the US market, the startup costs associated, what does the day-to-day look like, the 4 steps to success, and how realistic is it that you could be successful in this business as well, and kind of look at some like frequently asked questions. So let's jump straight into it. So who am I and why should you listen to me? So I am 23 years old. I'm from Glasgow, but I've been living in London for about 12 years. I always knew I wanted to build a business, be an entrepreneur. I just needed the right vehicle to put my energy and ambition into. I graduated uni in 2023 with a degree in business management from a pretty sort of average university, to be honest. Just basically saying that grades and experience don't really matter. Your mindset and ambition do. And channeling that mindset and ambition into the right vehicle is what's really going to drive you in business. After uni, I joined a headhunting firm in London and quickly became a top performer there. I was closing 360 deals between $20,000 and $40,000. I had a realization that the clients only really care about the results and the service that I'm providing them. They don't care that I'm wearing a suit or that I'm in a fancy office in London. And I kind of had this realization that I could do this independently and start the business from my bedroom, which is exactly what I did. The thing about headhunting is, the product that you're selling for anywhere between $20,000 to $40,000 is a candidate, and you source these candidates independently. So you don't need a company infrastructure backing you up, and you can basically get started and start closing deals very quickly once you got some good candidates. So like I say, I started my own agency. Within the first month, I closed a deal that made me $27,500. And now I've just finished my first year in business and I've done over $250,000, which very, very high profit margins, over 90% profit margins. And I've never looked back since. So that's, a little bit about me. Okay, so moving on to what actually is headhunting and is it the same as recruitment? So the short answer to that question is yes, it is the same. The long answer is no, it's actually very different. So headhunting is the process of searching for and delivering a very specific high earning individual, usually making at least $80,000. And obviously doing this for our client, right? So what we do is we target passive candidates, and passive candidates are candidates who are performing really well in their current role, and they're not, actively applying for new jobs on job boards, or they're not handing out their CV to different companies, right? These guys are already happy where they are. Maybe some things could be improved, but generally they're not applying for new roles. However, these people, they could be open to new opportunities if one was presented to them. So, for example, you could be a passive candidate. So let's say you're working in your job right now, things are going quite well for you. But if a recruiter called you up who specialized in, your industry that you work in and said that they had a role that was, paying a little bit more than your current role, maybe it was a fully remote basis, you might entertain that. Okay. You might not, I'll tell you right now that a lot of people do. And that is basically what passive candidate is. And our clients cannot get in contact with these people without us middlemaning and bridging the gap between the two, because they're not applying to new roles. So most of the candidates that we place into our companies would never have known about that company was hiring if it wasn't for us. And that provides enormous amount of values in itself. And that's why we can, justify charging such high fees of 25 to 30% of the salary. So, if the candidate salary that we place is $100,000 and the fee that we're charging is 25%, then, our fee would be $25,000. And I appreciate that might sound like a lot of money, but usually in construction, these candidates that we provide are going to enable the company to operate projects that are going to generate hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue and profit. So, if we place a really good project manager and my client pays me $25,000 for that, that project manager is going to then work on a project which could generate $1 million in profit. So for them to pay $25,000 is not actually that much money. And that's essentially what headhunting is, like in a very brief, concise way. There is obviously more to it, but that's kind of like a quick summary. Okay, how does this compare to recruitment? So recruitment in the UK is what most people think of when they think of the industry. And in the UK, it's a very bad reputation. So recruiters in the UK are seen as very sort of transactional, just cold calling candidates about roles that they're probably not even that interested in. And they're generally competing in a very saturated market. usually with lower paying roles and temporary positions. And lower paying roles equals lower paying fees for the headhunters. And temporary roles are just hassle and headache, which we're going to come on to in the next slide. And generally, these placements come with a lot smaller recruitment fees, lower profit margins, and just a lot more competition, just making it like a net negative all in compared to the US. And generally, recruiters in the UK are a lot less professional and just generally less respected than how it is in the US market. Okay, so we're now going to be looking at some of the key differences between the UK and the US market in relation to headhunting and why the US is clearly so superior. So first of all, role type. In the UK, often working on contract roles, which basically mean temporary positions with lower salaries. And in the US, we focus on permanent roles with a lot higher salaries. And obviously, we get paid based on the size of the salary. So the higher the salary, the more money we make. And to be a bit more literal with this, in the UK, the common fee size for the headhunter is between £5,000 and £10,000, whereas in the US, it's between $20,000 and $30,000, so a lot higher in the US. The size of the market, the headhunting market in the UK is $40 billion, whereas in the US, it's $200 billion, so obviously significantly higher in the US, presenting a lot more opportunity. Again, obviously the population of the US is a lot higher than the UK, presenting more opportunity again. In terms of the regulation side of things, in the UK, there's a lot more regulation. The headhunting firm often has to deal with like compliance, onboarding, background checks of the candidates, whereas in the US, there's very low regulation on this side of things because usually the US company who is our client will handle the onboarding, and that will be done by the HR department of your client. So once you make an introduction from your candidate to your client and they get the job, all the onboarding is handled by HR, and you're quite like hands off from this point, which is great. A lot less admin, a lot less stress. The market structure in the UK is dominated by some key major players, big job boards such as Reed and Indeed, where a lot of candidates will be applying to roles directly. A lot of companies are posting jobs on there, whereas in the US, there's not really any centralized player who is, operating these job boards or providing a space for people to apply to roles. Obviously, Indeed and LinkedIn and whatnot do operate in the US, but it's a lot less sort of monopolized, if you will. And generally, it's a lot more fragmented market, which gives the opportunity to carve out a very profitable niche, given that you're operating in a strong, high potential niche, which obviously we can help with. And generally, in the UK, a lot of people say like the UK is like bad vibes. And it's the same in business, right? So in the UK, companies are a lot more risk averse, which means they don't want to take on as much risk. So if you set up a recruitment agency in the UK and you try and start, working with new companies, they're going to be asking for your track record, your history, how long you've been in business for, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas in the US, they're a lot more of a results-driven culture. So if you have a great candidate and you can, provide that straight up and show that you understand the market and that you can provide value, they're going to be a lot more open to working with you, right? And this isn't like a headhunting specific thing. This is just a cultural thing. And then generally, again, the UK market is extremely saturated, as we've already kind of covered. Whereas in the US market, the barriers to entry are a lot lower. The barriers to entry are sort of perceived as high from a UK company wanting to operate in the US, but in reality it's very low and it's very simple to kind of get up and running, which again, we provide full support with. But essentially, look, I operate my business fully from the UK, from London. And if I was operating my business from, Dallas, Texas, it wouldn't actually make any difference. Maybe I could be able to meet clients in person more, which would be cool. But, it's kind of like a bonus. It's not an essential. And generally, everything's done over the phone and, just via your laptop. So essentially, you can do this fully remote from anywhere in the world, as long as the time difference is going to allow you to be able to speak to the US. And yeah, generally, barriers to entry are very low if you know what you're doing. Okay, so moving on to what does the day-to-day look like for a headhunting agency owner or for a headhunter? And it's really quite simple. We operate on a 360 model. So it's really just split down the middle. You're either doing business development or you're looking for candidates. So business development is essentially, bringing on new clients, speaking to clients, finding out what they're looking for in terms of the jobs, and getting on new jobs from those clients. Whereas candidate searching is obviously sourcing and qualifying good candidates for these jobs that you have on. So essentially, if you've got 5 active jobs on, you probably want to shift your focus to filling those roles and finding good candidates for those roles. Whereas if you've already got, 5 really strong resumes, then you should probably start finding some jobs for those candidates and sending those resumes out to your client list. And look, when you're starting any new business, it can be somewhat overwhelming. And like, what do I actually do day to day? One of the beauties of headhunting is very straightforward. There's only really two main things you want to be doing. And we actually give all of our students inside our program like personalized time block calendars, which are tailored to the amount of hours you want to be spending on your business, which basically just allows you to know exactly what it is that you need to be doing. And you know that when you're doing the task that you're not wasting time and actually you're doing the right thing. Which, the feedback from the students in the program already has been really valuable, because it's kind of like Tuesday between 3 and 6 p.m. They know exactly what they're doing, so they don't have to second guess. But generally, it's a very simple structure. You're either doing business development or sourcing candidates, so it's pretty straightforward. And look, moving on to the startup costs. So the startup costs are extremely low, especially compared to other business models, right? So essentially what you need to get started is your CRM, which is customer relationship management. That may sound complicated. It's really not. It's just a software that basically allows you to store your data on your candidates and your clients. And you can add, this straight from LinkedIn with like a click of one or two buttons, and they get put into your CRM. It's very easy. Data scraper, if you already work in sales, you probably already know what this is. Essentially, it's just a tool that allows you to pull people's phone numbers and email addresses from their LinkedIn profiles. The US phone system, so it basically is just an app on your phone. About £35 a month, which allows you to have a US number. So if I called you watching this right now from my US phone system, you'd get a normal call on your phone like you would if anyone called you, but it would come up with a US number. And what this basically means is that when I call people in America, they don't get a call from a +44, which is like the UK extension, and they don't think, why is someone in London calling me? This is a bit weird. They just get a normal call from the state that they're in, and there's no friction there when they answer the phone. So it's, extremely helpful. And then you do LinkedIn account, which you can get for free, or you can get premium for like £40 a month. We would recommend premium, but you don't need it. And yeah, look, you're only going to be looking at, anywhere from £150 to £250 a month. So even with my business now being, operating for over a year and, done a decent amount of money, my costs are only like £500 to £750 a month. Obviously, I have employees, so it's going to be a bit higher. Everything's kind of like doubled or tripled. But you can easily get started for, anywhere from £150 to £250. And look, generally the risk associated is very low and the potential for reward is very high. So you don't need any stock or inventory to get started. You don't need any office space. It can be done fully remote. You don't need to spend loads of money on marketing. The tools that you do need are very low cost, as we've kind of mentioned. It's very flexible and a very scalable business model as well. And it's very fast time to revenue, right? So you can close a deal in month one. And I actually just recorded a testimonial with William, who you can watch on my YouTube. I'll leave a link in the description, who closed his first deal within 5 weeks. And it was a $22,500 deal. And he went from zero sales experience or zero experience in headhunting whatsoever to closing his first deal within 5 weeks. And it was a $22,500 deal. And then he then went on again to do another deal the next month at about $10,000, or maybe a little bit less. I think it's about $9,000, that one. But that's what I mean. Like the time to revenue can be extremely high if you do the right things. And the demand is very high across every industry. Maybe not every industry, but obviously you're going to be selecting a niche in an industry where the demand is high. So look, and whilst people always talk about, oh, there's a recession, it's bad for business, there's always opportunity in recession. And even if there is a recession, you can pivot into an industry where there's not a recession. But really what you want to be doing is selecting an industry from the start, which is recession proof, or maybe an industry that's been receiving a lot of investment from, private equity, or other big investors, which usually shows that that industry is bullish and that industry is growing. And we can obviously provide support with choosing the right industry as well. Okay, so moving on to the 4 steps to success. And this is probably the most important part of this video, right? Because this really lays it out for you very clearly and makes it very digestible. So look, the first thing you want to do, set up the business, right? You want to go from having nothing to having something, right? So you want to register the business, takes about 10 minutes, choose the name, your niche and location, and get all your softwares and your database set up, right? You can have all of this done easily, to be honest, within a day if you actually just sit down and focus and do it. But you can easily have this done with a few days or, a week if it takes you a bit longer. But you can really get up and running very quickly, especially with the right support. You then want to create your client list. There's going to be a list of anywhere from sort of minimum 150 to 200 clients within your chosen niche and location, with their emails and phone numbers ready to go using the data scraper that we previously mentioned. Once you've made this list, you want to kind of put that to one side and forget about it for now. You're then going to move on to start doing your candidate outreach, right? So you're going to start outreaching to candidates in your chosen niche and chosen location, sending them certain messages and templates that we can provide to book a call. And then once you book the calls and get their resumes, then you can start sending these resumes to the client list. And that's kind of step 4. So you're going to then be presenting your best candidates to your list of clients. And there is a good way, like a kind of specific format and technique you want to go about doing this. But generally, if you do that and you follow it properly within a good niche and good location, like it's inevitable you're going to close a deal, right? If you've got a really strong candidate in LA, right, in a certain niche, and then you've got a bunch of employers in the same niche in LA and the candidate's really good and you're sending them out, like I can't stress this enough, like it's inevitable that you're going to book interviews, sign clients and close deals, especially if you're doing that consistently, right? Like this is what companies all over the world are doing. And if you're already spending, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day at work, if you just changed those 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day you were spending into doing this, I promise you it's going to yield you a very good return on your time and on your money. So look, that's basically the 4 steps of success. Obviously, you could go into more depth in each of these, which we do in the program, but I just want to give you kind of like an overview and make it as digestible as possible. And essentially, this is exactly what we do in my business. It's what all of our students do. It's what most of the large headhunting agencies do globally. And they do it because it works very well, right? And that kind of brings me on to the strategy that we teach. So the strategy that we use is very proven, targeted, and value first. And essentially what it is what I just previously mentioned in the last slide, where you're presenting a really strong candidate up front. And doing this allows you to basically add value instantly and also build your credibility very fast. Because if you've provided a candidate to a potential client and it's a candidate who works for a direct competitor and who's performing well there, that client immediately knows that you are credible and you know what you're talking about. They know that you're sort of fishing in the right pond, if you will, because they're definitely going to recognize the company that candidate works for if it's a direct competitor, right? So the client immediately knows that you can headhunt people who are performing well from their competitor and place them into your client's business, which is literally, that's exactly what they want from you, right? And you can provide this straight up, without having any prior experience or having any prior, relationship with that client. And it also allows you to give you something to discuss with the client straight away. So a lot of sort of videos I see on YouTube and TikTok and whatnot of like cold calling is a lot of people just like, hey, yeah, I have a business. This is what we do. Can we work with you? Are you interested? Like, that's just shit, to be honest. And you sound like every other salesperson. Whereas if you immediately have a really strong candidate, you're speaking to the client about a common interest, about this candidate. You're not speaking to them just about your business, which they don't care about, right? They care about how you can add value to them. And that's what you want to be leading all client conversations with. And like I just said, it's very effective and a lot more effective than just calling up clients and asking them for a job or asking them to pitch your services, or just pitching your services to them, I mean. And look, this is where all of my deals come from, other than repeat business. So once I've done this once and I've got a deal done with a client, then obviously you've got a relationship established and they're likely going to come back to you when they need help again. But it's a very effective strategy. It really does work. And it's the strategy used by all the major headhunting firms globally. Big companies in London and New York use this exact thing because it works. And it kind of takes me on to the next point, which is you only need one client. So the beauty of operating in like a high ticket industry like this is that you only need one client, okay? Especially at the start. So as you can see here on the screen, I have one client that's paid me $87,500 since August of last year, which has exactly been a year now. And obviously that's one client. We have multiple, but at the start, you only really need one. And look, the thing is, once you have that one client and you give them a good candidate, they're going to come back to you. And all you need to do is just search for the candidate on LinkedIn, send them some resumes and book the interviews, right? So once you put the groundwork in, which can only take like 30 days, you can really start to reap the benefits of it, especially if you've got clients who are coming back for repeat business, okay? So look, if you're just trying to replace a 30 grand a year income or a 50 grand a year income, like I cannot stress enough how easily you can replace that income. And look, also, if you're super ambitious and you want to scale to, multi 6-figure business and get an office and hire staff and build a team, You can also do that, right? It just depends on your level of ambition. But the point I'm making is if you just want to do this part time and replace your current income, you don't want to build a whole business, like you can do that. But it also accommodates for people who want to be more ambitious and build, a multi six figure agency, right? Um, and yeah, look, once you have your first client, you can get a testimonial from them. And then that makes it a lot easier to get other clients because you've got one client and you've got a review. You can even get like a video review of them saying like you were great, etc., etc. And because you're operating in a niche, the client that you operate in will know other people who also own businesses there. And if you ask them, they'll likely recommend you to other people. So once you've got that one client, things can really start to snowball from there. And using the strategy that I previously mentioned is a super effective way to get that first client. So look, moving on, how realistic is it that you could be successful with this business model? Well, so a good way to answer that question is by looking at other people who have done this, right? So what does the average recruiter in the US market bill in year one with no prior experience? So that's basically asking someone who's got no experience and they join a headhunting firm as a headhunter, what are they likely to generate within their first year? So on the low end, anywhere from $50,000 to $75,000. On the high end, up to $150,000. Okay. And obviously this is taken from like a massive sample size. So there's going to be loads of, data that's contributed to this answer. Maybe companies who are very poorly run, people who are operating in a really shitty niche compared to the sort of niches that we target. There's so many things that can play into this. But generally on the low end, you're going to be looking at $50,000 in year one, which is probably about £35,000 at the moment, which is like more, if not the same as the annual salary on average in the UK. Bearing in mind, you're doing this fully remote, no boss, working for yourself and your company director, which is much more tax efficient. And that's on the low end, okay? If you consider yourself to be above average, which you definitely should if you want to start a business. And to be honest, if you don't believe that your business is going to succeed, I would recommend you not doing it. Then you should be aiming on the high end, right? So in our program, our target for all of our guys in year one is to do $150,000. And that's extremely achievable when you're in the right niche and you're following the right program, okay? So as you can see, people are billing anywhere from 50 to 150K in their first year. So generally, like, it's very, very easily done if you're following the right steps in the right industry, okay? And look, it kind of brings me on to the next point. How long you should expect it to take you to close your first deal. Within my program, we aim to close our first deal within 60 days. And the reason for that is because we focus on doing the activities that drive revenue from day one. So you can see here in ChatGPT on the screen. Again, I must say this is going to be taken from a massive sample size of, hundreds, if not thousands of agencies across the world, all of which will have different training programs, different procedures, different amount of time before they actually let their headhunters focus on the thing that's going to make the money. But yeah, like I say, look, this thing, initial training and ramp up phase for the first month, like we certainly don't do that. And this is also going to be done on different industries. Some industries are going to be a lot slower moving than what we do. Some may be faster. I doubt it. I think we're in one of the best industries to be doing this in for sure. But generally, it's going to be a massive sample size, right? So it's quite a difficult question to answer. But look, even given that the sample size is massive, the fact that it's saying, sort of anywhere between 3 and 6 months, if you're closing a $25,000 deal per month within 3 months or 4 months or 5 or even 6 months, right? Like to me, that's still a very fucking good opportunity. If you can grind for 6 months and then start closing $20,000 deals every month, like, it's a bit of a no-brainer. But even then, 6 months is a very long amount of time. I'd be very concerned if it took anyone probably longer than 4 months. I'd be starting to get quite concerned. And within our program, if you're following it as you should be, it should not be taking you any longer than 60 days to close your first deal. And I have a whole other video testimonial which kind of details a bit more of this, which I'll leave the link in the description. It's already mentioned, but yeah, 6 months is a very long time, massive sample size. In our program, we aim to be closing first deal within 60 days. Okay, so where does my value actually come in here, right? So I'm not here just to say, start a recruitment agency or a headhunting agency. It's a great business model. What we can show you how to do is build a extremely high margin, laser focused, premium headhunting business and show you really everything from A to Z, right? So we can show you how to pick a great niche and focus on one location, how to find and outreach the best talent in the market, how to build a direct, effective client acquisition strategy that actually works, how to position yourself as a premium tailored specialist in order to justify those 25 to 30% fees with confidence, and then how to go ahead and deliver your candidates to your client and get paid. We really do cover absolutely everything from A to Z for a very reasonable price. So look, if that's at all of interest to you, I'm going to leave a link in the description to apply to work with me. Whereas at the moment, my main priority is my own headhunting agency. It takes up most of my time. So I really don't have that much availability to take people on. So do appreciate if you can apply kind of formally through the website. Because we only really want to take people on who we know are going to be successful, or we have high confidence are going to be successful, because we also have a sort of a guarantee, a full refund guarantee if you're not successful. So, we need to make sure that if you want to join, that you're serious about joining and that we kind of qualify you and accept you. So look, if that is of interest to you, click the link in my description. You can send an application through. And if you have any sort of just general questions on anything, I'll leave my socials. Feel free to drop me a question. Be more than happy to address. Even if you're not interested in the program, I'm still happy to help you out with any questions you do have. And yeah, look, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you got some level of value from it. I probably will be posting some more videos on the business, so do stay tuned for that. And if you enjoyed it, if you could do a like the video, that'd be appreciated, and subscribe if you want to see more content. Yeah, thank you for watching.